What if the one person everyone dismissed as weakest was the only one the monster could not break? In a kingdom ruled by wolves, they said no woman could stand before the Alpha King without collapsing. Some lost their minds, one never left alive. So when a blind servant girl was brought into his presence, no one expected a miracle, only another tragedy. But the moment she stopped in front of him and did not kneel, the entire court fell silent. Because for the first time, the most feared wolf in the realm was not looking at prey. He was looking at someone his power could not reach, and what began as an impossible moment would soon threaten the order of the whole kingdom. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin the story. The Great Hall of the Citadel was built from black stone that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. In the hours before dawn, when torches burned low and the wind pressed itself against the iron-framed windows, the room felt less like a court and more like a mouth held open waiting. It wasn't reverence that kept the crowd silent, it was anticipation. Not the eager kind, the kind you felt when the ground above you cracked and you understood too late that the mountain had decided to move. Alpha dominance filled the hall, the way smoke filled a sealed room, slowly at first, then all at once thick enough to taste. It clung to the back of throats, turned breath shallow, made skin prickle, as if warning the body to prepare for impact. Cale Draven stood at the top of the raised dais, one step below the throne he rarely used anymore. He did not move. He didn't need to. His presence did what motion couldn't, pulled every living creature in the room into orbit around him. His eyes were the color of old gold, unblinking, predatory. Wolf eyes in a human face. Even the proudest nobles in the front rows kept their heads slightly bowed, as if their necks had forgotten they were allowed to lift. A young noblewoman stepped forward. She wore ceremonial white and silver stitched with the crest of her bloodline. A Luna candidate. One more attempt offered up by the Elder Council like a prayer they didn't believe in. She stopped at the marked line on the floor 2 paces beyond what any sane wolf would consider safe. Her spine was rigid, her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had drained pale. I have been chosen, she began, voice trembling with the fragile courage of a girl who had been told her duty mattered more than her life. The sentence did not finish. Kyle's gaze touched her. It wasn't a glare, it wasn't anger, it was attention, absolute, focused, the way a hunting wolf fixed on movement in tall grass. Within 5 seconds, her breath broke. The steady inhale she had practiced became a stutter. Her shoulders quivered as if her muscles no longer trusted their own strength. Her knees softened in a way she could not control. Someone in the third row whispered, small and sharp with panic, "Don't look into his eyes." 8 seconds in the girl's body betrayed her. She dropped hard onto the stone floor as if the bones in her legs had been removed. Her hands slapped down to catch herself. Fingernails scraped granite. A strangled sound escaped her throat part, gasp part, sob part animal. At 10 seconds, her wolf collapsed. Her wolf. It wasn't a dramatic faint. It was worse. Her body went rigid and then slack like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Her eyes lost focus, staring through the hall rather than at it. Her chest fluttered with shallow, frightened breaths that didn't seem to reach her lungs. Healer Seraphine Crow crossed the floor, immediately, skirts snapping around her ankles like she was moving through battle. Back, she ordered without looking at anyone. All of you, back. 2 guards hurried forward to lift the girl, but Seraphine's hand flashed out. Not yet. She knelt beside the candidate and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her throat, then to her wrist. Her face did not change, but her voice did tighten, sharpened by the moment. Her heart is dropping into extreme submission. If I don't pull her back, she won't return. A shiver moved through the hall. Nobody said the part everyone was thinking: she would be alive technically, but the person inside her might never wake up again. Kyle did not speak. He did not shift his weight or turn his head. And yet the pressure in the room deepened, as if the wolf inside him sensed weakness and pressed harder, not with cruelty, but with instinct. The girl was dragged out by the time Seraphine stabilized her breathing. She hung limp in the guard's arms, head lolling like a broken flower. No one followed her with their eyes. No one wanted the last image of her to be the thing that haunted them next time they tried to sleep. When the great doors closed behind the procession, the hall remained frozen in its careful stillness. Not because the danger had passed, because the danger was still standing on the dais, breathing like a predator that had learned patience. Those who remained did what every wolf did around a dominant alpha. They lowered their gaze, controlled their scent, kept their bodies small. Ronan Vare stood to Kale's right, the beta's frame thick with scars and discipline. He didn't look afraid. Bets rarely allowed themselves the luxury, but his posture was tight, as if he was holding a line no one else could see. "Minimum distance," Ronan said quietly, loud enough for those closest to hear. No one steps forward. A new guard, pale with youth, had the misfortune of glancing up toward the dais. Immediately, the older soldier beside him yanked his sleeve down hard enough to bruise. "If you want to live," the veteran hissed, "don't look." No law was read aloud. No formal decree was written and nailed to a wall. It didn't need to be. Everyone in that hall understood the rules the way prey understood the shape of a shadow overhead. In the presence of an alpha too strong, the body did not argue. It obeyed. It either submitted or broke, trying not to. Seraphine rose, wiping her hands on a cloth. Her gaze skimmed the room like a blade. "The female body cannot endure this level of dominance," she said flatly. "This is no longer a matter of mind or training, it's biology." No one contradicted her. In the Ravenhold Dominion hierarchy wasn't a concept. It was a language the body spoke without permission. Alpha dominated. The weak obeyed. And anyone who failed to obey was punished not by the alpha's cruelty, but by the world's natural law. That was why when the doors at the far end of the Great Hall opened again, the sound felt wrong. Not wrong because it was loud, wrong because it was ordinary. Two guards entered, their boots echoing on stone. Between them walked a girl in plain servant gray. No jewelry, no crest, no silk, nothing that suggested she belonged in this room. Her eyes did not track the torches or the faces. They stared forward without focus, the pupils fixed in the stillness of someone who saw nothing at all. She moved carefully, measuring distance by sound. One step. Another. The faint scrape of her heel told her where the stone changed texture. Her chin lifted slightly, as if listening for the size of the room. Matron Elske, the head of the Citadel's domestic staff, walked behind her with the stiff authority of someone who believed all human beings were tools, and some were simply better made than others. "Debt transfer," Elske announced, voice cold and brisk. "From the border, no strategic value." Ronan's eyes flicked to the girl. His brow tightened. "She doesn't know who she's standing before." Elske's answer was clipped. "She's blind." A ripple moved through the nobles. Not pity. Assessment. Useless. The girl stopped, sensing space open around her. She tilted her head, listening. Her voice, when it came, was small but clear. "There are many people here." No one responded. She listened harder, as if their silence was information. "And one person is standing very still." Somewhere deep in the hall, a torch popped. The sound was sharp in the quiet. That still person was Kale. Ronan looked to the dais for a heartbeat, then spoke to her. "You're standing before the Alpha King." The girl paused for a single breath. Not fear, not awe, just processing. "Do I need to do something?" The question was simple. It was also wrong. Completely wrong. Around her, the crowd held their breath, as if the air itself might be insulted. Lord Valor Thorn, head of the Elder Council, stepped forward one pace. He was not tall, but power gathered around him like a cloak. Quiet, practiced, ruthless. "Bring her closer," he said. Ronan did not move immediately. His gaze slid toward Kyle, seeking a cue, a warning, anything. Kyle gave nothing. He did not order it. He did not forbid it. Valor continued, voice calm. "We've tried the strongest, the best trained, the most prepared. The outcome is the same." His eyes settled on the blind girl. "There is no reason not to try the weakest." A noble behind Valor let out a low laugh. "If she dies," the man murmured, "at least we won't have wasted anything valuable." The girl heard him. Everyone could see she heard him because her head turned slightly toward the voice. But she did not react. Ronan stepped closer to her. His voice lowered, measured, like someone guiding a child toward the edge of a cliff without wanting the child to understand it was a cliff. "5 more steps," he said. She nodded once, as if following instructions was familiar. 1, 2, 3. Every wolf in that hall watched the space between her and Kyle shrink into something lethal. Valor's tone sharpened with restrained interest. If she kneels like the others, he said, we close this path. He paused, and for the first time, there was something bright in his eyes, hunger for an outcome that would serve him. If she does not, he didn't finish the sentence aloud. He didn't need to. Everyone felt the implications settle over the room like fresh snow on a battlefield. Then we have something more valuable than all the Luna candidates before her. The girl reached the marked distance where women had broken in seconds. She stopped. No one reminded her to bow. No one dared. Kyle's eyes fixed on her gold and unblinking. The pressure in the hall descended. A guard near the door whispered under his breath as if counting was a prayer. 3 seconds. The girl remained standing. 5 seconds. Her shoulders didn't tremble. Her breath didn't fracture. 8 seconds. She did not kneel. Ronan's jaw tightened. Seraphine took half a step forward, forgetting her own caution, for the sake of witnessing what should have been impossible. Valor murmured almost to himself, continue observing. 10 seconds. No collapse. No submission response. No failure. The blind girl tilted her head. Sir, you are standing in front of me, aren't you? No one answered. The audacity of the question wasn't its content. It was its calmness. She spoke again, voice gentle, almost puzzled. I don't feel like you want me to kneel. The hall went dead silent. Kyle did not move, but something in his gaze changed, slight as a shift in wind. It stopped being assessment. It became focus, total consuming attention. He took one step down from the dais. The sound was soft, but several wolves in the front row flinched and instinctively leaned back like prey, reacting to the shadow of wings. The girl did not move. Ronan's voice snapped sharper than before. Hold distance! Kyle stopped. Not because Ronan had commanded him, because he chose to. Seraphine whispered disbelief, stripping her usual edge. No reaction. No reaction at all. Vylor's eyes narrowed as he studied the girl, his expression sharpening into calculation. Kyle stared at her for several long breaths. He did not push dominance. He did not order. He did not strike. For the first time in months, perhaps longer, the Alpha did not press his power onto the wolf standing before him. The blind girl asked quietly, as if seeking confirmation of something she could not see. Am I standing in the wrong place? No one answered. Finally, Ronan spoke, his voice lower than it had been at the beginning, as if the word itself carried risk. No. One word. But it shattered the old certainty that had ruled that hall. Valor turned to Ronan. Keep her, he said. Ronan did not argue. He only nodded once tight controlled. Elska pulled a small ledger from her sleeve and wrote quickly. Status change, she said aloud, making it official by sound alone. No longer ordinary servant. The blind girl, Leora Vale, stood still. She didn't understand all of it, but she could feel the air had changed the way a room changed when everyone decided you were no longer invisible. Do I need to leave? She asked softly. Ronan glanced toward Kale. Kyle said nothing. Ronan answered for him. No. From now on, you stay. Leora nodded as if accepting an assignment. No one spoke after that, yet everyone in the hall understood the same thing. She was no longer a simple debt transfer. She was the only wolf who had stood before Kale Draven and had not knelt. If she couldn't be controlled, then what exactly was she becoming? And why did the most dangerous alpha in the kingdom stop breaking things when she was near? Because the moment she walked into his world, something inside him started to change, and no one knew if that change would save them or destroy everything. Let us know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe before we step into the most intense part of the story. The days that followed did not feel like days. They felt like a pattern, forming slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Leora did not return to scrubbing floors or carrying trays or sleeping among the other servants in the East Wing. Her schedule was rewritten without consultation. Every morning before the Citadel fully woke, a guard would arrive at the servants' quarters and speak her name as if it belonged to someone else. Leora Vale. On your feet. She would dress in her plain gray uniform and follow the sound of boots down stone corridors. She learned the Citadel by echo and scent, by the way air cooled near the North Wing, by the faint drip of water in a passage that never fully dried. The Great Hall was gone from her routine. Now the space narrowed into controlled environments, a long stone corridor, a wide empty chamber with no unnecessary furniture, muted torchlight and a heavy door that always closed behind her with the finality of a lock. Ronan was always there. He stood near the entrance like a barrier given flesh. When she stepped into the room, he spoke in a low voice that reminded her of a drawn blade. "Stand here," he said the first morning, guiding her 2 paces forward. "Do not move unless you're told." She nodded, stepping into the spot he indicated. "Am I on the mark?" she asked, because she could not see the line on the stone. "Yes," Ronan said. Kale was already in the room. He was always there before her. She sensed him the way she sensed a storm before it arrived, pressure heat, the thick pull of a presence too strong for ordinary air. The first day was like the great hall, only quieter. She stood. He watched. No words, no movement, no submission, no collapse. The second day was the same. The third day, healer Seraphine began attending in person. She positioned herself near the wall with a notebook and instruments, as if they were witnessing an illness rather than a king. Heart rate steady, she murmured more to her notes than to anyone else. No forced submission response. Outside the door, guards whispered, 3 days, and she still hasn't knelt. Another voice answered, awe threaded with dread. Not still. Never. Every morning, Leora asked the same question, as if refusing to assume safety in a place built on certainty. Am I standing right? Kyle never answered, but he never forced her down. The repetition did something strange. It carved a new shape into the Citadel's reality. It created something no one knew how to name, a stable space between an alpha and a female wolf. Not submission, not resistance, something else. After a week, the first visible change came from Kale, not her. Servants who worked near his wing began to whisper about nights that were quiet. No crashes, no splintering wood. No howl that shook the corridor and left soldiers sweating at their posts. One guard approached Ronan on the 7th morning, speaking carefully as if words might provoke the old chaos. Last night, it was silent. Ronan stared at the closed door for a long moment before answering. Yes. Seraphine's notes became more detailed. Her handwriting sharpened, urgent in a way that betrayed her fascination. Control duration increasing. Aura fluctuation reduced. On the 8th day, Leora noticed something with a tilt of her head. You aren't standing above me today, she said quietly. The room went still. Ronan's gaze flicked to Kale, disbelieving that she had noticed at all. Kyle's voice came low and rough like stone scraping stone. No need. 2 words. Simple. But Ronan turned his head sharply as if he'd been struck. Seraphine's mouth parted, the healer in her fighting the scientist. He's adjusting, she whispered. Kyle was no longer simply a source of pressure. He was beginning to control the way his pressure existed. That should not have been possible, not in his state, not after months of wolf-dominant instability. And yet the evidence stood in a blind girl who did not kneel. Because no one could use eye contact to break her. Because she listened instead. Because her world was built on sound breath movement and the honesty of distance. In that world, dominance was not a command. It was a weather pattern. And weather could be endured. It could be measured. It could be approached carefully, without panic, without worship. That was how the communication began, not with romance, not with tenderness, but with an exchange of observations that forced Kale to become aware of himself. Your breathing is faster when there are more people, Leora said on the 10th morning. Kyle did not reply. But the harsh pull of his inhale slowed fraction by fraction, as if he had heard and obeyed the observation, without realizing he was capable of obeying anything that wasn't instinct. Leora continued because silence did not discourage her. Silence was simply another texture of sound. When it's only me, you stand closer. Ronan frowned. What are you talking about? Leora turned her face slightly toward Ronan's voice. I can't see, she said simply. So I hear. The room fell into a long, stunned quiet. Then Kyle spoke the words, sounding like they hurt to form. You aren't afraid? Leora did not answer immediately. She actually thought. It wasn't a performance. I know you're dangerous, she said finally, but I don't feel like you want to make me afraid. It wasn't defiance, it was description. Seraphine's pen moved faster. Ronan went still, as if he had become the wall behind him. And Kale stayed silent, but the pressure in the room did not spike with anger. It steadied. like a wave meeting shore and deciding not to crash. From that day on, small exchanges began to appear scattered and incomplete like sparks in ash. Not every day, not in full sentences, but enough to form a channel. Enough to prove that somewhere under the wolf, the man could still hear. The first physical contact happened on a morning when the air felt different, thicker, sharper, as if the citadel itself was holding its breath. Leora stepped into the room more slowly than usual. She stopped in the center instead of moving directly to her mark. "I'm not sure where you are," she admitted quietly. Ronan instinctively started forward, his boots scraping the stone, but Kale's hand lifted a fraction, a silent signal. "Stop." Ronan froze, shocked that Kale had issued a gesture, at all shocked too, that he obeyed it without thinking. Leora stood still for several seconds. Then she lifted her hand, not fast, not trembling. She extended her fingers into the air, feeling for the boundary that told her where Kale's space began. The guards outside the door murmured in panic, "Don't let her!" Ronan raised his hand, cutting them off without looking. Leora's fingertips touched Kale's wrist. Nothing happened. No collapse. No immediate submission response. No violent flinch from Kale. He did not jerk away. He did not seize her. He did not force her down. He stood perfectly still. Leora exhaled softly, relief passing through her like warmth. "I needed to know the distance," she said, voice low, "so I wouldn't stand wrong." Kale's answer came slowly, as if the words had to travel through layers of instinct before reaching his mouth. "You aren't wrong." For a heartbeat, Leora's hand stayed on his skin, not out of boldness, but out of reality. Touch was how she confirmed truth. Then she withdrew. Her posture did not change, but something in the room did. It was as if everyone, including Kale, had been waiting for the world to punish her for daring to touch him. And when it didn't, the old story cracked. After that morning, the shift accelerated. Kale no longer held an absolute distance, but he also did not close it. Instead, he learned a new skill that no one believed he possessed in his current state. He moderated. Ronan noticed first. "He's adjusting." To her, he murmured one evening to Seraphine when Leora had been led back to her quarters and the room felt empty, in a new, unsettling way. Seraphine didn't look up from her notes. "Not to her," she said. "For her." Leora began to feel it too. She entered the room one day and realized she could breathe more easily. "The air isn't pressing as hard," she said without thinking. Kale didn't respond, but his shoulders looked less rigid, the tension in his stance easing by a fraction. Once she stepped a pace too far toward him. Her heel clicked on stone and she sensed the shift, Kale's breath changing, the pressure tightening. Before Ronan could bark a command, Kale moved. He stepped back half a pace. Not retreating in fear, retreating in control. Leora's head lifted. "You moved," she said softly. Kale's voice was rough. "You shouldn't come closer." Leora nodded, accepting the boundary without resentment. "I understand. It wasn't a dominance line. It was a safety line." For the first time, Kale Draven, whose presence had reduced noble women to trembling ruin, was limiting himself for someone else. Days passed without dramatic events. No screaming, no blood, no shattered lives. Only micro moments that added together began to build something dangerous and tender, a space where Kale could exist without destroying everything around him. He stopped standing behind her where she couldn't hear him clearly. Instead, he kept himself within the range of her senses, as if learning her world. Leora began to recognize his moods by breath alone. One morning, she stopped before reaching her mark and said quietly, "Today, you're not well." Kyle did not deny it. He didn't confirm it either, but he didn't push her away. When a stranger entered the room, an unfamiliar guard, a council messenger, the air changed immediately. Kyle's inhale sharpened. The pressure surged. Leora took one step back without needing to be told. Ronan noticed. "You know when to move," he said, suspicion and reluctant respect mixed in his tone. Leora turned toward his voice. "It's not moving away," she corrected softly. "It's just not needing to be close in that moment." One afternoon, Kyle held his position longer than he ever had. He didn't pace, he didn't strike the walls, he didn't break furniture that wasn't even there anymore, Seraphine whispered, awe slipping past her usual detachment. "He's holding baseline 3 times longer than his record." Leora sat down on the floor cross-legged because her legs were tired and her blindness had taught her long ago that pride didn't keep you standing when your body needed rest. No one stopped her. Kyle did not react. The silence that formed between them wasn't tense. It wasn't dangerous. It was safe. In a quiet, fragile way that felt like touching a glass held together by thin gold lines. Outside the door, a guard murmured half to himself, "It's like he isn't him anymore." Ronan's reply was slow, weighted. "No," he said, "it's like he's coming back." Leora did not fully understand the political implications. She didn't know the council's calculations, or Celine's growing resentment, or Valor's hunger for leverage. She only knew what her body knew, that the room didn't crush her, that the wolf in Kyle did not demand her submission, that she could stand near the most dangerous alpha in the Dominion and feel not safe exactly, but not broken, and that the strangest part, the part she didn't know what to do with, was that she began to notice changes in herself. Not fear, something else. An awareness that lingered after she left the room. A heaviness in her chest when the door closed behind her, as if something had been severed that she hadn't realized she was holding. One evening after another controlled session, Ronan guided her back to the corridor. At the threshold, Leora paused. "Tomorrow," she asked quietly, "am I coming again?" The question was small, but in it was something raw. The recognition that this had become part of her breathing rhythm, the way the Citadel's bells were part of the day. Silence stretched. Then Kale's voice came delayed but unmistakable. "Come." Leora nodded once as if the word had anchored something in her bones. She turned and walked away, listening to the sound of her own footsteps echo down the corridor. Behind her, Ronan remained with Kale. Ronan's voice, low and careful, drifted after her like a shadow. "You know this won't stop here." Kale did not answer, but he didn't contradict it either. Leora reached the bend in the corridor where the air cooled and the smell of stone changed. She paused for a heartbeat, one hand brushing the wall to orient herself. She wasn't afraid, not in the way everyone expected her to be, but something had begun to exist between her and Kale Draven, something she could not see but could feel like gravity. And she had the unsettling sense that she was walking away from the only place in the Citadel where she had ever truly stood without being made small. She continued toward the servants' wing, her fingers curling loosely at her side, as if still remembering the warmth of a wrist beneath her touch. Somewhere behind locked doors and watched halls, a wolf that had not allowed anyone close in months was learning a new rule. Not all strength demanded kneeling. Some strength could choose to hold its breath and wait. Seraphine Crow's workroom sat in the oldest part of the Citadel where the stone was darker, and the corridors held a permanent chill, as if winter had been sealed into the walls. The only warmth came from a low brazier in the corner and the thin glow of lamps that made the ink on her desk gleam wetly. The desk itself was no longer a desk. It was a battlefield of paper. Notes were stacked in uneven towers, weighted with polished stones so they wouldn't slide. Charts of heart rhythms were pinned beneath glass. A crude map of the contact chamber had been sketched and revised so many times the parchment had worn soft at the folds. Beside it lay a line of tools, stethoscopes, vials, scent dampeners, small silver needles arranged with the precision of someone who trusted order because it was the only thing that didn't betray her. Ronan Vare stood near the door, arms crossed, the bulk of him blocking half the room's light. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in months. "You asked for me," he said. Seraphine didn't look up. She tapped a finger against a sheet where ink curves rose and fell in tidy waves. "I did," she replied, and her voice carried that particular healer's tone, calm on the surface, sharpened underneath by the hunger of an unsolved problem. Ronan stepped closer. His gaze flicked across the paper. "What am I looking at?" "You're looking at Kale's heart," Seraphine said, finally lifting her eyes. "In 3 states, alone, in the presence of a normal female wolf, and in the presence of Leora Vale." Ronan stared at the lines. The first was jagged, erratic climbing and dropping like a creature trying to tear its way out of its own ribs. The second spiked into panic the moment a female entered the space. The third calmed. It didn't just stabilize, it returned to something almost ordinary. Seraphine spoke slowly. choosing each word like a surgeon selecting a blade. It isn't that she's stronger, she said. It isn't that she can resist him. Ronan's brow furrowed. Then, what is it? Seraphine's mouth tightened as if admitting the answer offended her instincts. She doesn't respond. Ronan's expression hardened. Doesn't respond isn't an answer, it's a riddle. Seraphine slid another sheet forward, a list of observations written in her neat, unforgiving handwriting. When a female wolf stands before an alpha of that magnitude, her body chooses one of two pathways, Seraphine said. Submission or resistance. Collapse under the need to yield or fracture under the need to survive. Ronan said nothing. She does neither, Seraphine continued. No submission cascade, no resistance spike, no scent flare, no trembling, no forced drop in heart rate. Ronan's jaw tightened. That's not possible. A young healer seated at the side table blurted before she could stop herself. It isn't possible, the girl insisted, eyes wide. It's instinct. It's how wolves are built. Seraphine turned toward her, gaze steady as ice. Then she said quietly, "We are standing in front of an exception to instinct." The young healer fell silent, swallowing hard. Ronan looked past Seraphine's desk, toward the shadowed corridor beyond, toward the wing where Kale was kept like an earthquake behind locked doors. Exceptions, he said in a low voice, always come with a price. Seraphine didn't disagree. She just watched him as if measuring whether he was ready to hear the next part. "I need to speak to her alone," she said. Ronan's eyes narrowed. Why? Because if I don't understand what's happening in her body, we'll mistake it for magic. Seraphine replied, and the moment people think it's magic, they'll stop treating her like a person. Ronan exhaled through his nose. That already started. Seraphine's gaze held. Then we're late. Leora Vale sat in the chair across from Seraphine's desk with both hands resting flat on the wood. She had learned in the last few weeks that stillness made people underestimate you. Stillness made them speak freely. Her eyes remained unfocused, fixed somewhere beyond the lamplight. She wore the same simple gray servant dress, her hair braided tightly to keep it from falling into her face. There were no ornaments, no marks of favor, nothing that would protect her from being labeled. Seraphine moved around the room as she spoke, as if motion helped her keep her thoughts sharp. "Do you know why you don't kneel?" Seraphine asked. Leora tilted her head slightly, listening to the healer's footsteps. The rustle of paper, the soft scrape of a chair being pushed back. She shook her head. "I just don't feel like I need to," she said quietly. Seraphine stopped moving. "It isn't that you don't need to," she said bluntly. "It's that you don't understand what you're not doing." Leora's fingers curled slightly against the desk. "I understand kneeling," she said. "I know what it means." Seraphine let out a short breath that was not quite a laugh. "You understand kneeling as a choice," she corrected. "The wolves in this citadel do not kneel by choice. Their bodies kneel before their minds even decide." Leora fell silent. Seraphine leaned forward, her voice lowering, not out of softness, but out of focus. "You can't see his eyes," she said. "That matters. Eye contact is the strongest trigger for a submission cascade. It's the first channel." Leora's mouth tightened. "So I'm only spared because I'm blind." Seraphine's pause was slight. "Partly," she said, "but not entirely." Leora lifted her chin a fraction. "What else?" Seraphine walked back to her desk and picked up a thin folder. "You didn't grow up in this system," she said. Leora frowned, confused by the word. "What system?" Seraphine held the folder against the desk like she was about to deliver a verdict. "The system where female wolves are trained from childhood to recognize alpha presence as law," she said. "The system where you learn before you learn to read, how to lower your eyes and soften your scent and let your body fold when a dominant male enters the space." Leora's breath caught, not with fear, but with recognition of something she had never named. "I grew up in the border valleys," she said slowly. "There weren't courts. There weren't alphas like that. There were packs, yes, but they were small. The men hunted. The women hunted. No one practiced submission." Seraphine finished. Leora's fingers relaxed. Seraphine's voice became harder, more clinical, as if she needed the tone to protect herself from the implications. "You don't kneel," she said. "Not because you are special." Leora flinched. It was a small movement, but it was there. Seraphine didn't soften. You don't kneel because you never learned how. The words hung in the air like a blade held between them. Leora swallowed. So I'm empty, she whispered. A gap. Seraphine's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did an honest flicker of something like pity quickly buried. Not empty, she said. Different. Your instincts don't interpret his dominance as a command. They interpret it as pressure. Whether a threat, yes, but not a law. Leora stared past her sightless, and suddenly the strange calm she had carried like a shield began to feel fragile. Not because she had been brave, because she had been unaware, and ignorance, she realized, was not a gift that lasted. When Leora left the healer's wing, the citadel sounded different. Not because the halls had changed, because she had. The whispers that had once been background noise servants speaking too softly as they scrubbed and carried and survived now cut through her attention like needles. As she moved down the corridor, guided by the echo of her own footsteps and the distant clank of armor, she heard voices around a corner. The last one, a servant murmured. Another voice answered tight and eager with rumor. She doesn't speak anymore. A third voice lower, and the one before her died on the stone. Leora stopped so abruptly her skirt brushed the wall. The voices paused, sensing someone nearby. Leora turned her face toward the sound. Those women, she asked quietly. How long were they near him? Silence. No one wanted to answer a question like that. It felt like speaking a death sentence aloud. Finally, someone spoke, barely audible. No one lasted more than a minute. Leora stood motionless. A minute. She thought of all the mornings she had stood before Kyle Draven and breathed. Thought of the steady way his presence had filled the room and how she had called it pressure, discomfort, a storm. She had never called it lethal. The realization arrived in her body. First a slow cold spread under her ribs. She whispered almost to herself, "So if he loses control." One of the servants spoke without looking at her. "You won't have time to kneel." The words were quiet, but they struck harder than any shouted threat. Leora's throat tightened. A minute, less. Kale Draven's dominance was not merely frightening. It was a force that could break a wolf's mind and body without him lifting a hand. And she had stood there unbent because her instincts had been missing a rule everyone else carried like bone. For the first time, she understood what the Citadel had been warning her about. And for the first time, she had a reason to fear. Real fear, not the imagined fear of rumors, the fear of physics. If the wolf in Kale decided she was prey, she wouldn't survive long enough to regret her choices. Her fingers pressed to the wall, grounding herself. She forced a slow breath, then another, and she kept walking, because the most terrifying part wasn't the fear itself. It was what the fear made her realize she had been standing near a monster, and the monster had been choosing not to eat her. The next morning, Ronan was waiting for her outside the servants' corridor. He rarely came this far into the domestic wing. His presence alone made people scatter like leaves in wind. Leora heard his boots and stopped. He didn't speak immediately. She felt his attention the way she felt a shadow crossing light. "Are you still coming today?" he asked finally. Leora's hand tightened around the edge of her sleeve. She didn't answer right away. "If I don't," she said slowly, "what happens?" Ronan's reply was blunt in the way of a man who had watched enough death to stop wrapping truth in cloth. "Then they'll find someone else," he said, "and the result will be the same as before." Leora swallowed. And Kale. Ronan's silence confirmed it. Everything would return to that jagged line on Seraphine's chart. The pacing, the destruction, the isolation so complete it had turned a king into a weapon that couldn't be sheathed. Leora lowered her chin slightly. A long beat passed. "I'll come," she said. Ronan exhaled. It sounded like relief and frustration tangled together. He studied her face. He knew. Somehow he knew she had learned something. "You understand now," he said quietly. "You aren't moving through this blind anymore." Leora nodded once. "I know. And you still want to go in." Her voice softened, and for the first time it carried something that wasn't merely calm, something human. "I don't want him to be alone," she said. Ronan's throat worked. He looked away, as if her words had dragged something raw into daylight. "Then walk," he said. and he led her back toward the wing where the air grew colder and the walls seemed to hold their breath. That day, the chamber felt heavier the moment Leora stepped inside. She didn't need sight to know the difference. The room held tension the way a bow held strain. Kyle was standing, still as always, waiting as always. But the rhythm of his breath was deeper, slower, as if his body was wrestling itself into control. Leora stopped at her mark. She didn't speak immediately. She listened. She murmured mostly to herself. Ronan's voice came from the door, cautious. What? Today feels different, she said. Kyle didn't answer. He also didn't step closer. Leora's fear rose sharp and immediate, not because Kyle moved, because he didn't, because the stillness felt like restraint. She took one step forward anyway, not confidently, not as before. She felt the air thicken around her. I know you're dangerous, she said, voice steady but not careless. I know what happened to them. Silence. I know you could break me, she added, and that truth tasted bitter in her mouth. Still no answer, then because she could not bear the quiet like a wall, she said the most honest thing she had. But I'm still here. The pause that followed was long enough to make Ronan shift at the doorway. Kyle's voice, when it came, sounded like it had been pulled from a place that rarely used language anymore. Rough, slow, a human mouth remembering human speech. Stay. It wasn't a command, it wasn't dominance, it was a request, simple, exposed, almost painful in its directness. Leora's throat burned. She nodded even though he couldn't see the gesture clearly. I'm staying, she whispered. And for a moment the weight in the room eased, not vanished, not softened into romance, but eased like a storm settling into rain instead of lightning. For the first time, Leora understood fully what was happening between them. It wasn't an alpha demanding submission. It wasn't a girl resisting power. It was two living creatures both trapped in systems they didn't choose, finding a third path by accident, and then choosing it again on purpose. The moment the pattern became real, politics took notice. The closed meeting was held that evening in the council chamber, a room built for decisions that didn't need witnesses. Lord Valor Thorn stood at the head of the long table, hands clasped behind his back. The elder's hair had gone silver at the temples, but his eyes were sharp and cold as riverstone. Ronan sat to one side, tense and silent. Seraphine sat across from him with her notes. Lady Selene Arctis leaned against the chair at Valor's right, her posture too relaxed for the anger in her scent. Valor began without ceremony. We are no longer observing an anomaly, he said. We are holding a tool. Ronan's chair scraped as he pushed forward. She is not a tool. Valor didn't even look at him. Everything is a tool when it exists inside the system, he replied calmly. Even you. Selene let out a soft laugh that held no humor. A blind servant, she said, voice dripping with contempt, wrapped in silk. Replacing what we were bred for. Seraphine's gaze lifted. She isn't replacing anyone, the healer said. She's stabilizing him. Selene's eyes sharpened. Stabilizing, she repeated, or controlling. Valor's tone didn't change. If she keeps the alpha stable, he said, then she is the only thing preserving our power. Ronan's hands clenched into fists on the table. Seraphine watched Valor for a long moment, then asked the question that sat beneath all of it. What exactly do you intend to do? Valor's answer was the kind of answer that never sounded like a threat until you understood what it meant. We test the limits, he said. We confirm whether she's reliable. Selene's smile curved. And if she isn't, she murmured, we find out quickly. Ronan's voice cut in sharper. You're talking about her like she's a leash. Valor finally turned his head and met Ronan's eyes. I'm talking about her like she's the only way to keep a king from becoming a disaster we can't control, he said. Selena leaned forward, her scent sweet with poison. Let's see, she said softly, if she's truly special. And just like that, the conflict became official. Not between Leora and Kale, between Leora and the world that wanted to own what she could do. The next day, Leora was not led into the familiar chamber. She knew it immediately. The air smelled wrong, too many bodies, too many scents layered like smoke. The sound of breathing was everywhere overlapping. The room was larger, echoing, and the moment the door shut behind her, she felt the weight of being observed. Too many people, she said before she could stop herself. Ronan's voice was beside her, tense. Vylor, he said flatly, this isn't necessary. Valor replied without looking at Ronan. It is? Selene's voice slid near Leora's ear, close enough to be intimate, which made it worse. You've never seen him lose control, Selene murmured. Have you? Leora's fingers tightened at her sides. Selene's tone remained gentle, almost amused. Then you don't know what you're standing beside, she whispered. Let's see. Leora didn't answer. She couldn't trust her voice. The door opened again. The room changed instantly. Kyle entered. Leora felt him before his boots touched stone. The pressure shifted as if gravity had doubled. The air seemed to press against her skin, searching for places to push her down. Her breath slowed instinctively. Not submission preparation, but this time the fear in the room was contagious. She could smell it. She could hear it in the shallow inhales of guards. She could sense the tightened posture of the council members who dared to stand near. Fear transmitted fear, and her body, now aware of what she had been blind to, began to react. Selene stepped forward closer to Kyle than anyone should have. Her voice rang out sharp and provocative. You can't control yourself, she said. Can you? Kyle did not respond, but the pressure surged. Leora took half a step back. For the first time, she whispered almost without sound, I can't breathe. Her heart kicked hard in her chest. Blood rushed. Heat crawled up her throat. Her hands trembled. It wasn't just fear. It was her body finally discovering the rule it had been missing. A pulse of panic rose, the instinct to kneel, to yield, to make the pressure stop. Kyle felt it. Leora knew he felt it because the room vibrated with his sudden awareness. Dominance flared fast, violent, reflexive. The space seemed to shake. A guard dropped to his knees instantly with a broken sound, as if the air had ripped his legs out from under him. The old loop had begun. But it didn't follow the old direction. Kyle didn't look at Leora. He turned sharp, decisive toward Valor and Selene. His gaze snapped onto them. A table between them exploded under a single strike wood, splitting with a crack that echoed like thunder. Ronan shouted, voice like a whip. Back, everyone, back. Kale took one step forward, not toward Leora, toward the council. Selene stumbled backward for the first time, her composure shattering into real fear. Vylor remained standing, but his scent changed. The elder's calm was still there, but something else threaded through it now, recognition. Kale's growl rolled out low and deep, shaking the lamps, vibrating in the bones of everyone who heard it. It wasn't aimed at Leora, it was aimed at the source of danger, at the hands that had tried to weaponize fear. Ronan grabbed Leora by the elbow and pulled her backward out of the chamber. His grip was firm, protective, urgent. From now on, he said harshly, you are not safe. Leora's breath came in short, ragged pulls. Because of me, she whispered, or because of him, Ronan didn't hesitate. Because of both. Behind them, Kale remained in the room, a storm held barely in shape, and no one dared to approach him. Valor's voice carried through the doorway, cold again, composed again as if he had just watched a weapon misfire and was already rewriting the plan. We have our answer. Selene's voice was smaller, shaken. It isn't a miracle. Valor's reply was flat. No. A pause. It's something that can break the order. Leora walked down the corridor with Ronan's hand still on her arm. Her body still trembled. Her fingers still felt numb. But she didn't kneel. Not even then. Because now she understood. She was no longer an innocent exception. She was a variable powerful enough to change the structure of the Dominion. And powerful variables did not remain free for long. The confrontation that followed was inevitable. It happened in the larger council hall, where the Elder Council gathered like a wall of stone, and Kale Draven stood before them like the storm they pretended to command. The air was thick again, but different than it had been in the test chamber. This wasn't uncontrolled dominance, this was controlled pressure. Kyle holding himself back with force so precise it was terrifying. Valor spoke first measured. We've seen the result, he said. She stabilizes you. Kyle did not answer. Valor continued. Then the solution is obvious. She remains with you, under the supervision of the council. Ronan's hands curled into fists. No one supervises her like that, he snapped. Selena's voice cut in sharp. We wouldn't supervise her, she said. We would supervise him through her. A silence. Kyle stepped down one pace. The pressure in the room rose like water behind a dam. No, one word. Several council members flinched and lowered their gaze without meaning to. Valor did not move. "You are placing emotion above structure," he said calmly. Kyle's golden eyes lifted fully. "She doesn't belong to you," he said, voice deep enough to vibrate. Celine smiled brittle. "She belongs to the pack." Kyle's answer came slower, colder. "Not like this." For the first time, the Alpha King stood between the council and a single servant girl and made it clear there would be consequences. Leora waited in the corridor outside, unable to see the room, but able to hear every word through the thick door. "Control, stabilize, tool." The same words repeated like chains being measured. Mira Fen, one of the few servants who had dared to speak to Leora without flinching, stood beside her, voice shaking. "They don't see you as a person anymore," Mira whispered. Leora swallowed. "They see you as the way to keep him from going mad." Leora's hands clenched. "If I leave," she asked softly, "what happens?" Mira hesitated. "Maybe everything returns to before." Leora's throat tightened. "And if I stay?" Mira's answer was quiet, honest, brutal. "Then you won't be free." Leora stood still, feeling the wall's cold stone under her fingertips. "I can keep him calm," she whispered. Mira swallowed. "Yes, and they'll use that." Mira didn't deny it. Leora exhaled slowly. She understood the shape of the trap now. She could save him, or she could become the chain that kept him bound to the council. Either way, she was the center of something she never asked to be part of. That night, the door to Kale's chamber closed behind her with a heavy sound that felt like the end of an argument. The room was empty except for them. No observers, no council, no witnesses. Kyle stood in the center, not approaching. Leora stepped inside and stopped. "They want to use me," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Kyle's answer was quiet. "I know. If I stay," she went on, "they won't stop." Kyle didn't speak for a long moment. Then very low, he said a single word. "Kneel." It was the first time he had said it to her directly. There was no crushing aura forcing her down, no dominance wave, no biological whip. It was a final test. Leora's breath came uneven. She was afraid. She could admit that now. But she didn't kneel. She lifted her head slightly, facing the sound of his voice. "I know if you wanted," she said slowly, "I wouldn't be able to stop you." Silence, but you don't. Kyle didn't deny it. Leora's voice softened, but it didn't weaken. "And I don't want to kneel." That was the difference. Not ignorance, choice. She took one step toward him. Not fast, not fearless. Her heart hammered and her throat felt tight with the old survival instinct that wanted to keep her small. She stopped very close, closer than she had ever been. "I'm scared," she admitted. Kyle didn't pretend otherwise. Leora lifted her hand slowly, fingers trembling with the honesty of it. She placed her palm on his chest, exactly where she could feel the beat of his heart through the fabric. One heavy thump, then another. Nothing exploded. No pressure slammed into her, no collapse, no violence. Leora whispered, voice low, intimate, without trying to be, "But I believe you won't break me." A long silence. Then Kale's hand covered hers, not gripping, not claiming, simply holding, as if anchoring himself to the proof that she was real. His voice came rough and exposed. "Don't leave." Leora didn't pull away. "I'm not leaving," she said, not because she wasn't afraid, because she chose trust anyway. Outside the door, Seraphine's voice was a whisper, stunned, heart rate normal. Ronan stood there without speaking. He didn't need to. His eyes carried what his voice refused to. Inside the room, the air changed. The oppressive weight, the thing that had made wolves kneel without understanding why, began to recede, not because Kale was forcing it down, but because he no longer needed to fight himself. Wolf and man balanced, not perfectly, but enough. Enough that the room stopped feeling like a cage. Enough that Leora could breathe. "It doesn't hurt," she whispered. Kyle stood still. He didn't need to restrain his instincts. He was, for the first time in a long time, simply present. The council reconvened the following day, and the atmosphere was different. Vyler looked at Kyle with the careful scrutiny of a man who had gambled, and found the table had changed beneath him. You have control, Vyler said. Kyle didn't deny it. Celine sat rigid silent, her earlier confidence bruised into something sour. Ronan spoke voice firm. No leash. Vyler's response was slow. No leash, he agreed, if this stability holds. Kyle's eyes lifted. It won't hold, he said evenly, if you continue to interfere. Silence. For once, Valor did not press. He nodded once, almost imperceptible. Then he said, we will adjust our approach. The council retreated not out of kindness, not out of defeat, but out of necessity. They could not control a variable that refused to behave like a tool. On the day Kale returned to the open courtyard, the entire pack gathered. The citadel's outer square was wide flanked by iron banners and stone pillars carved with the old wolf sigils. Hundreds of wolves stood in ranks, watching with the tense attention of a crowd that had learned to fear its own king. Kyle appeared at the top of the steps. No signs of instability, no wildness in his movements. His eyes were still gold, still wolf, but the chaos behind them had quieted into something sharp and controlled. Beside him stood Leora, plain gray dress, no crown, no marks of status, no kneeling. The pack waited. Some wolves dipped their heads by habit bodies, remembering the old rule, but no one dropped to their knees. No one was forced. Leora remained upright, her posture calm. She could not see the sea of faces, but she could feel their presence, the way she felt wind before rain. A guard murmured to another voice, barely audible. She isn't kneeling. The other man answered quietly. No one is making her. A third voice, older, almost reverent. And he isn't making anyone. Then slowly, one wolf in the front row lowered his head, not in submission, triggered by dominance, but in recognition. Another followed. Then another. A wave of bowed heads moved through the crowd like a ripple through water. No one knelt, but the entire pack lowered their gaze to the blind girl standing beside the Alpha King, acknowledging what they could not deny. She had changed him. Not by conquering him, not by controlling him, by refusing to become small even after she learned exactly how dangerous it was not to. Leora stood still and felt the shift, a collective movement of air and breath and respect. She spoke very softly, so softly only Kyle could hear. I could kneel, she said, if I wanted. Kyle's gaze turned to her, focused. Leora shook her head, once a small gesture certain. But I don't want to. Kyle didn't answer with words. He stayed beside her, and for the first time in the Ironhold Citadel, a woman stood before an Alpha King, not because she didn't understand the cost, but because she understood it completely and chose her own spine anyway. What began as a girl who didn't kneel became the moment an entire kingdom had to change. When fear no longer controls you, even the most powerful force in the world can learn to be human again. Thank you for staying with this story. If it moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments and see your support with a like or subscribe. And if you're not ready to leave this world just yet, there are many more stories waiting for you.